If I could talk to my younger self, I would want to tell her that I'm proud of her and that she's doing a great job and that it's okay. I would just tell her that, you get there, you make it. You get a degree, you got to see the world, you got to travel, you get to live in a little house with a garden with some guy you love. You're also gonna tell your mom that you're bi. And I know that we said we weren't ever gonna do that because we were scared about what she was gonna say. But she tells you that she loves you. And it's not what you think it is. And that you're not what's wrong with the world. You're just you, and you're doing your best. And I'm really proud of you.
None of us wants to have the feeling we're going to be cut from the herd. That is a basic human instinct, that we belong, that we experience both intimacy and that we belong. It's also a really important human experience that the groups that I choose to participate in accept me, and that I don't feel like at any moment that the lines could shift and I could feel cut out, or I could feel even attacked by my own group. That's an incredibly human, basic desire, right, to belong. None of us want to feel like we're going to be cut from the herd. That's an awful, awful human experience. And we know that it invokes things of self-doubt, self-shame, criticism, fear, because those people can't be known, because they can't share parts of themselves, because they can't participate fully. When we feel at risk, we have to cut off aspects of ourselves. We have to withhold. We have to limit. We have to be cautious. We have to divide. We have to constantly position ourselves. And as human beings, what we know is that doesn't build relationship. And it doesn't build disclosure. And it doesn't build a sense of connection. I don't think that kind of separation is ideal. I don't think that kind of distance is what it means to be part of the kingdom.
I don't really feel comfortable here, but then again, I don't know if I've ever really been in an accepting environment, except, among the few friends that I've made here. Yeah, I've never really known a good combination of a loving and accepting environment. Even if it is accepting, it would be in a more agree to disagree way of sure, you can think that, but we are going to do everything in our power to convince you otherwise.
Because I saw in the covenant that sexuality wasn't listed as part of individual uniqueness, and I saw the limitations against same-sex dating, and so I was yeah, sure, it's not like a state school and I'm gonna have boundaries on me. I'm just not gonna think about it. I'm not gonna worry about it. It's not a big part of my identity. So I kind of brushed it to the side. As soon as I got here, I kind of realized how much pressure there was to be heteronormative, to find a wife. And everyone was so obsessed with, the dating culture here is so crazy. It's so crazy. We're all talking about the dating culture freshman year. And I was I can't even date.
I think the most impactful memory from my freshman year was when I joined my hall's growth group. I had to sit for 30 minutes as they talked about how disgusting it was and how unimaginable it was to want to date a woman as a woman. And I just sat there because I couldn't make myself walk out. In addition to that growth group, you have these chapel speakers reinforcing ideas that to be Christian means to be straight, and to be Christian means to be cisgendered.
It's like really hard. Like as I told you, like I feel that I'm like obligated to be another person. So because I'm like back and forward like US and Costa Rica like a couple of times per year, I feel that I just need to like new mask and another mask.
For the most part, I've been fairly well accepted by my peers. However, I have seen innumerable occasions where people have been insulted for their openness in being within a sexual or gender minority, and that's not been uncommon, and that's something I've heard as a pervasive continuation through all 4 years.
I think another effect of the lack of validation in sexuality is the way that students feel the right to treat minority sexualities, especially online. I don't have to support sin to treat someone nicely. Do you realize God rejects people from his kingdom? Wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. Depart from me, I never knew you. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord. JBU is wrong for teaching a worldly view of homosexuality as truth when sexual immorality is mentioned many times. I do have sympathy for those who struggle with that. Sexual sins are so hard to shake. That's why the Bible is clear about how serious they are. Difficulty doesn't mean giving up and accepting. So I think this comment just continues that narrative of you can't be a part of the church, you can't be loved by God until you change, until you convert. You know, you can't come as you are and have a conversation.
I tried to convince myself that my gender identity and sexual orientation were a choice for years. But that didn't work. I'm still gay, I'm still queer, I'm still non-binary. Trying to change myself did not work. Not because I wasn't putting in the time, not because I wasn't praying hard enough, not because I wasn't being devoted enough, not reading my Bible enough. I did all those things and I did it well. But it didn't change who I was. In fact, it brought me closer to myself enough to realize that I couldn't change my gender identity and I couldn't change my sexuality, and God wasn't asking me to.
Sometimes I think our students feel the pressure to choose between their sense of Christian identity and how they're going to resolve these questions of sexual orientation or gender. It's important to keep in mind that when we have intersecting identities, the difficulty can be, how do I honor both? Or how do I resolve it in a way that both are true or that both are held? So the idea, I think, of accepting or acknowledging or finding a way to own and then to live at peace with ourselves around sexual orientation is really important. The idea of finding a way to live at peace with our faith, really important. Sexual orientation, like you're saying, though, is something that is part of their experience every day and it can influence so many other choices. It can influence, like, what faith community do I feel accepted in? Or what faith community do I go to and constantly feel like I'm diminished? What faith community do I go to and feel like I can't participate fully or be known? It influences choices like who they're going to spend time with. Are these safe friends? Are these not safe friends? Can we talk about this? Can I acknowledge this or not? How do I express this? All of those questions that our students talk about and that others talk about. So the idea of resolving it is really important. The idea of resolving it in a way that we can live with, incredibly important. And we know that no matter what those questions are, it takes time. And it takes an ability to process that with safe people. I think that's what I would love to see our students find places where they can do that well.
As somebody who was raised in a religious household, I know what the thought process is. And the thought process is, it is a sin, and so we need to keep people from sinning the best way that we can. If you love someone and you see that they are sinning, you want them to not be sinning so they can live their best life and be with Jesus more. And it's almost noble. It almost is. It's almost very noble.
In the pursuit of a relationship with God or in maintaining my faith, it is very, very hard because I can only hear the voices of my growth group leaders in my head praying. The ones who condemned me and hated me, I could only hear them in my head when I was trying to pray. So I lost my ability to pray in the way that I did growing up, to worship in the way I did growing up, to attend church in the way that I did growing up. I lost every aspect of my faith, like structure part of my faith, other than the fact that all I knew is that Jesus would be the only one who didn't leave me. I still can't go to church. I still don't go to church, but I do not engage with the religious community around here because of my sexual orientation and my gender identity. I physically can't.
Yeah, sexuality has by far been the biggest obstacle in my faith journey. And it's only until recently that I've started to reconcile those two things, and seen and kind of come to the realization that I can be gay and a Christian, and I can be both and. I don't have to choose. But I think I speak for a lot of students here and probably in Christian environments across the United States that you're terrified to pursue your faith when you're gay because church culture makes it seem like that's not possible and that you must change your orientation before you can pursue a relationship with God.
I think the church would be fine with people being asexual if it did not fall within the same community as everyone else who is not heterosexual. Because I feel like that's part of the problem with me and the church right now, is that basically anyone who does not identify as heterosexual it's outside of the norm. It's scary. It's a conversation that they don't want to be having.
I think one of the most difficult things about being LGBT on this campus is I know, like, maybe it sounds silly, but there's not like a club or a building or a place that I can go to and know these are my people, I'm safe here.
Biblical marriage is a covenant relationship between one man and one woman,
And therefore romantic relationships are reserved for a man and a woman.
and Christians should seek to live with integrity and congruence between their birth sex and their gender identity.
We support and care for individual uniqueness.
In the context of God's grace, we value the racial, ethnic,
Gender and religious diversity of our community.
Honoring the unique gifts and dignity of each person.
Show redemptive grace and compassion to each other by speaking the truth in love.
foster an environment of transparency, authenticity, and unconditional love.
JBU as a private institution does have the rights to assert whatever rules they deem fit. The community covenant lists several minorities who are protected, and LGBT plus community is not one of those groups that's mentioned. And in a different section, it states that relationships are deemed appropriate if only between a male and a female.
The first time I saw the covenant, the first time I signed the covenant, I was a freshman at JBU. It made me feel lesser than and non-human. It justifies violence through an alienation of a very diverse group of students on campus. I've been completely unable to date during college. And that's might seem like a little thing, and some people just don't date through college because it's a choice. And I've partially chosen because I know isolation is better than the struggle to hide for me. Choosing to isolate myself was easier than the fear of my peers outing me to administration.
And obviously, lots of schools wouldn't have anything like a community covenant. Lots of secular schools don't have very little in that way. I think there's three main reasons that we do it. And first is really, it's a summary of our student handbook. Second purpose is transparency. I want prospective families, prospective students to know sort of who we are, what our Christian expectations are. and the way in which we go about doing education here at JBU. And so the community covenant helps to set that transparency for people, so nobody's surprised. Nobody's surprised that they've come to the place that has these sort of expectations. And third, my real hope is that it captures what I understand to be true Christian love, which the way I would define that is this balance of grace and truth. That we are, in the true sense of the human condition, we are all miss the mark. We all fall short. We all are unable to meet up to God's ideal. And that's the truth about the human condition. But on the grace side, the creator of the universe still loves us, still forgives us, still wants to be involved in our lives, still wants to redeem us. So that I'm hoping, and I know that we sometimes fail, but I'm hoping that the community covenant captures both that grace and truth. We believe sexual intimacy is reserved for one man and one woman in the covenant of marriage, and that for single people, whether they be gay or straight, that it would be celibacy would be the way to steward sexuality. We express that knowing for all single people. That might sound like a hard expression. It might sound like a lonely life. That might sound like unfulfilled desires. And I do think the expression that we should support and encourage and honor and value singleness is something the church hasn't done. It only offers 4 things, right? And again, part of the point about the community covenant as a summary of the whole student handbook, is it says even in the preface to the community covenant, what we offer here is illustrations. They're illustrative examples. They're not exhaustive of all examples. So we don't say anything about socioeconomic, we don't say anything about international, we don't say anything about marital status, we don't say about a whole bunch of things in that particular paragraph. That being said, if we did, and there's a real question whether we should expand the list and have more and more things that you include in there, or if we should think about framing it in a different way, that all human beings are created in the image of God and are worthy of dignity and respect. I do think if we expanded the list, I think it would be more likely that we might use, again, the biblical understanding of marriage and singleness as the ways in which the Bible talks about stewarding sexuality. And again, with a full honoring of that. And I do think there's a role for single people to teach us, and we should value single people in their celibacy in ways that the rest of the community can learn from. So that's, if we did do a revision, I think that's the way it would head. Again, I'm not sure if that would be, I don't know how LGBT students would interpret that, but I do think those are the biblical categories of identity that talk about sexuality. But I actually think Christ would approach LGBT students as he approached everyone that he approached. And again, that's where I began, with that sense of love as being this combination of grace and truth. He realizes that we are messed up in all sorts of ways, and yet he still loves us. So I think he would approach with compassion, he would approach with understanding, and he would also approach with a call for that particular person to live a life of obedience into the teachings of what he understands the proper way to steward sexuality. The other thing I try to be really careful about is to sort of not describe this situation as a struggle with my sexual orientation. I instead say this is the question that they have, trying to understand their sexuality, and it is in a sexual orientation that is same-sex attracted. Because I know that some students don't struggle with the actual orientation. This is how they feel. But it still is a question about how they then are going to act on that feeling. And that really is a different question than the orientation itself. What I would hope for any LGBT student at JBU is what I hope for any student at JBU, that they would sense God's love in their life, they would sense a calling in their life for what God wants them to do in this world, and that they would sense how they could live out their Christian life in obedience to what God's teaching is. So those, I don't see LGBT students as having somehow a different calling in that, but that's the love I would want to have for any student that would be at JBU. I also know it doesn't always work out in practice, right? We work towards an ideal, and then we say forgiveness when we don't get it all the way to the ideal. So I know there's been experiences that have not been good for students, and that saddens me. At the same time, I seek to help us to do better so that we can accurately represent, we understand scriptural teaching, while at the same time providing love and respect to people that might disagree.
I went to JBU my freshman year, so in 2017. I planned on staying at JBU until I graduated. I was so involved in the community. I was like the lead in the freshman play. I worked at the school all throughout the semester at the Career Development Center. I was super involved in my major. I was one of the leaders of Mosaic at the time. So I was like everywhere. Like I was super involved and invested in the community because I liked being there. And I applied to be an intern over the summer. And it was that summer that I met my boyfriend Patrick. I had made like our relationship like Facebook official. And so like I posted about it. I was like, this is the relationship I'm in. Posted on Facebook, didn't think anything about it. Like half the summer goes by. It's probably like July or so by now, maybe even close to August. And I get an email that just said, someone at JVU has provided me content from your Facebook or something about like a relationship you're in. If you could just come to my office so we can talk about it or something. And basically, he told me that, you know, you're posting your relationship on Facebook. Like, that's just not like in congruence with like JBU's beliefs or something like that. There was no rule that said I couldn't be in a same-sex relationship. There was nothing in the covenant I signed that said I couldn't be in a same-sex relationship. And so eventually in our last meeting, I essentially told him, well, I'm not taking this Facebook post down. I'm not gonna like pretend to break up with my boyfriend, because he did insinuate that if I took the post down and maybe just didn't, if people didn't find out about it, then it could be okay. Told him, like, I was like, I need clarity on this because this is not fair to me as a student for me to not know what is going to happen to me if I stay at school like this. Eventually he told me that, well, we'd probably have to like walk through like the disciplinary cycle, so you could get on probation, and eventually I got him to tell me I could be expelled. And so essentially I kind of realized once I got that answer, I was like, I have to leave. My hand was forced to transfer essentially. Like I was basically given the ultimatum of, you either need to sacrifice a part of yourself to stay here or you can leave. And then I transferred, and that's essentially the story of what happened. When you're LGBTQ at JBU, there's an invisible line in the sand, because you can come to school, like you can be LGBTQ at JBU, but there's this line that you can't cross, but you can't see it. Now, I know ever since I left, they have added some more explicit language to the student handbook. And so I think their position is a little more clear now. At least now, I hope that LGBTQ students who want to be at JBU at least can see the line in the sand that's always been there, and at least know that if they cross it, that something's going to happen to them like what happened to me.
Every student during this period of time in life is working out something about their sexual orientation, their sexual identity, and what it means for them to be in the body in which they were born in the social context, right? So the idea of gender identity. What are their boundaries gonna be? What are their guidelines gonna be? In what spaces do they feel really comfortable, and what spaces do they not feel comfortable? I think there are particular ways that any school, that any community can listen better and can find ways to like, okay, how can we support this so that we feel actually able to know each other? How can we support this in a way that we feel like it's safe to be known? If nothing else, it should be okay to be known. There are things that each of us give up in order to be part of a group. We all do it, whether it's that we're changing our language, whether it's that we're changing our dress, whether it's that we're doing something like this. And I think it's really challenging for any community to decide where those boundaries will be. But I also really do believe that if we can't be known, then the purpose of the community has also lost some of its benefit. So how do we protect the real value of being in community, of knowing and supporting one another? I think part of the challenge has been that has to mean everybody instead of just maybe a select group of people. Some Christians who identify as LGBTQ have said, I really think that it is okay for me to engage in this in a committed, loving way, or I really think that like I identify as a trans person and it's okay for me to find a place where I can exist in terms of that could be a variety of changes or expressions, right? You'll also find some very committed Christians currently who will say, I identify as LGBTQ, but because of my reading of scripture and church tradition, I'm gonna manage my sexuality this way, whether it be through abstinence, whether it be through whatever. But can we actually like trust that God is gonna work a lot of this out? And I think that is really terrifying. Like for family members who don't agree, I think it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying for parents and children who don't agree from both sides. I think it's terrifying for friends who don't agree. And perhaps this is part of our question of faith. Perhaps this is part of our question of, I am accountable to God, and I am accountable for the good of my brother and sister. And part of my job is not to make new barriers for them, but to walk beside them and listen well. And if I'm gonna fail in some way, gosh, I really hope that's how I fail. I hope that the way I fail is by listening too well. I hope that the way I fail is by being present. But this is our challenge. As a Christian community, I think we have to get better at this conversation. This will be the conversation, I think, one of this really significant conversations for the next few decades. But I'm really glad that some of our students are brave enough to provoke us to have the conversation, because I think it's critical.
Humanity is so complex. We are complex people, and that's part of why we're image bearers. So it's important to recognize that complexity and that nuance in every single person. And out of that mutual love and respect for each other, then conversations will happen. And then love grows from there. My challenge to just students in general is to just love one another and get to know one another rather than making assumptions about each other. I just want gay students to know that you can pursue your faith, and it doesn't have to be a scary thing. And you don't have to fear losing a part of yourself or repressing yourself in order to be in a relationship with Jesus. I know there's lots of challenges in the future of the school, and there's going to be a lot of change in the next 10 or 20 years, and I have no idea what that's going to look like. But I can only have hope that things will get better for everyone, and that everyone will feel that they have a place to belong here at JBU.
Tell